Hello, everyone. Today, I am very happy to bring a special guest that I have not had on the show yet, but hopefully, it won't be the last time. Today, I am welcoming Laurel Hightower. Welcome to the show, Laurel.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Do you mind
Thanks
giving
for
yourself?
working with my schedule.
Yeah. Do you mind giving yourself a brief introduction?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Laurel Hightower. I am a horror writer, predominantly, although I've dabbled a little bit in crime. I have 7 books out and then a whole lot of short stories because people keep giving me a chance, which is super nice of them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm a horror writer, I'm a mom, and I'm a paralegal.
Yeah, awesome. Now, I know you've had a pretty busy weekend. For example, yesterday, you went and got yourself a new tattoo.
Yes. So if you hear crackling, it's that like
Just the
coating on the
tape,
back of
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Can you describe what it is? Because I know it's, like, on your backside somewhere, so you can't show us,
hmm
but what can you describe what it is?
Yeah, so it is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Encanto.
Okay, I don't think so.
Okay, so that's a Disney movie that came out like a couple years ago, I think, and
Oh, yeah, okay, I know what that movie is, yeah. With
yeah,
the big
yeah.
guy played by The Rock, I think?
No, that was Moana.
Oh, right, so I'm
Yeah,
getting everything mixed up here, yeah, okay.
I can tell that you're not forced to watch every Disney movie as it comes out, and I can't tell you how happy I am for you.
Oh, no, I do have a kid, and we do watch a lot of Disney, but he's starting to grow out of it, so,
Ah,
yeah, I'm getting kinda lucky in that department.
yeah. I look forward to the day that I don't know the entire soundtrack of every Disney movie that comes out, but, I mean, but, they are really good. Encanto especially, I really liked, and so they have like each of the characters, except for the main one, has like sort of a special gift power. And they all have these doors that like sort of represent their power. And so I got Luisa's door. She's the oldest sister, and her power is just like strength. But she has this great song called Surface Pressure, where basically you see the crack in the facade of like, she feels like she has to handle everything and carry everything, and she starts in her song, she's talking about how much of a burden that is and how hard it is to do that and maintain, the kind of facade that she has. And I've really identified with that song. Most moms I know do. And people who aren't moms, like I think I mentioned it in line at the bar at StokerCon in 2022, and like 3 different women turned around and sang the rest of the of the chorus. But yeah, she has a line that says, "I'm pretty sure I'm worthless if I can't be of service," and
Yeah.
that just so yeah, I wanted to kind of get something that, I still try to do like the tattoos that mean something to me.
Mhm.
And this very much has kind of been on my mind. So I'm really happy with it. I love my artist. I've just learned to trust him because I'm not great at visualizing.
Mhm.
And so I'll be like, I don't know, didn't know if it was going to look like that. And he's like, just let me, and he does it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's absolutely perfect. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. It was, it got pretty spicy toward the end, but.
You have, quite a few tattoos. Do you always use the, same artist? Or
Um, so I have 4, all pretty good size, and, the other 2 that are on my back, I had done by another artist when I was, like, 20 and, like, 21, 22, and then she doesn't tattoo anymore, so, I started getting tats again in 2022, and I go to this guy now. He did my shoulder piece, which I love, and he's gonna be adding on to that one, in a couple months. So, yeah, he's great. He's an excellent artist, and he's, you know, somebody that's easy to, like, talk to while you're getting tatted, so that's always a plus.
awesome. Now, um, I have a few tattoos myself, but I sort of stopped getting them, when I was in my late 20s, and I don't know why, but I found it was addictive. Do you find getting tattoos
Yes.
addictive?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, because it's just, I don't know, especially if you have good experiences with it,
Yeah.
and one thing that I noticed was, like, but again, before a couple years ago, I didn't have all of mine were on my back. And I'd done that purposefully when I was younger because I was like, hey, I'm going to be working in the corporate world. I'm not going to try and shoot myself in the foot. I love my tats, but I'm going to make sure it's something I can cover. Um, and then my law firm really loosened up quite a bit, and the other assistants were getting, they all had like visible tattoos. I'm like, hey, me too. So I got my shoulder piece and was so happy with it, and it hadn't occurred to me before how different it is having one that you can see all the
Mhm.
time. And so I'm just like, oh yeah, more please. Yeah, it's very it is very addictive.
Yeah, it truly is. I find myself walking around, or I used to find myself because like it seems like a lot of people get tattoos now much more than they used to. Because I used to walk around, I have a tattoo on my forearm here, and people would look at it before and then look at me and as though they were judging me. But now nobody looks at that at all because most people around here have like sleeves.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, which I vastly prefer that. I don't think anybody should get one who doesn't want to and isn't fully committed to it, but it's just such a joke to judge people for it. It's
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's sort of backwards thinking, I guess, but or maybe it depends what country you come from too, because some countries it's like very strict. People who have tattoos are criminals and they could kill you.
well, yeah, there's definitely some connotation there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I want to switch gears just a little bit because in researching you, I learned that you've suffered from social awkwardness a
Mm.
lot, and that's something I have a problem with. Anytime I'm out in public or meeting with people, people can tell right away that I'm weird.
Hey, same. So,
Yeah, I was wondering what steps did you take to overcome this, especially when you're meeting with fellow horror writers and whatnot.
well, the nice thing about fellow horror writers is the vast majority of us suffer from social anxiety. So it's like it's a good icebreaker. Like, hi, I'm weird. Oh, me too. Fantastic. Let's
Oh,
sit down
great!
and be
Yeah.
awkward together. Kind of a thing. So that is nice because I do feel like, especially anytime we have to be like public facing at signings and things like that, I think a lot of us get hugely anxious. I know I do. Um, but a lot of it has just been kind of like just in some ways just being upfront about it, like
Hmm.
so that I feel less pressure to like conform exactly. But then I also just, to be honest, I mask really well. And that definitely gets exhausting. I'm not diagnosed neurodivergent and I don't know that I am, but it really spoke to me during lockdown when people would talk about what a relief it was not to have to mask all the time
Yeah.
for that. So yeah, I mean, I do that, but it's also I'm very fortunate to have made a number of really close friends that I tend to see at cons most of the time, and that's just such a nice thing because you can let that drop, in the after hours. Like you can just like you can hang out with certain people and just be okay. I am exactly who I am. They don't expect me to be anything else. It's fine if I go face plant in my room. It's fine if I, avoid everyone. It's fine if I sit in the corner of the bar and, be
Just
weird.
kinda look
So
like with your drink and be
I'm
like
judging
that
you,
old
but it's really just the resting bitch face.
Oh, I have a serious resting bitch face. People don't
Same.
know how to approach me because, I'm just like I mean, this, right? Like, people are always like, "Oh, he looks mean," but, I don't think I'm mean, but, it's just this face, this and so lately I've been trying to like hold my eyebrows up when I'm in public so that and you know what? It works. If I'm walking around like this instead of like this, people will smile at me and start talking to me with my eyebrows up. So I don't know. I get it's kind of weird, but I
That's
guess
so
it's just more of a friendly expression, right?
Yeah, I can see that. It's actually like a one-line joke now at my job, like, because for a while people would ask me, like, they're like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "It's my face." So now it's like that's just something we all say to each other. Like, one of my attorneys will be like, "Are you doing okay?" And he's like, "It's my face." So we just made it a shorthand thing.
Now, you've podcasted yourself. You were one of the hosts of the Ink Heist. I was wondering if that helped you overcome social anxiety because it's I've been doing this for about 10 years now, talking to authors with various different podcasts and whatnot, and I've noticed it's helped tremendously get over that that almost crippling shyness of where I come from with my childhood.
I I would say it definitely had a positive effect on it, not just podcasting there where I was a host, but also just the amount of podcasts that I've done, and like interviews and things like that. Um, I honestly still always get anxious. Um, I'm so glad, Katrina. Thank you.
Yeah, Katrina left a comment and she's saying, I get really anxious at signings as well. You actually signed my copy of Crossroads and it wasn't awkward at all.
Oh, thank you. That is so good. That's so good to know. I think some of that has to do with us being with our people to an extent, but.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
I do think the podcasting helps. I do still get super anxious. I was really anxious before this, but I think it's, I used to do theater when I was a lot younger, and it would be the same thing. I would just be super anxious, and as soon as I stepped out on stage, I was fine. So for the most part, it was. But there's some, I think too, there's this, like, you develop a little bit of a knack of starting and continuing conversations when you're the host. You have your list of questions, and you feel this responsibility to move things on, to make people feel welcome, to make sure that you're keeping the pacing right, and
Mhm.
responding appropriately. So yeah, I think there was some skill that I developed doing that. But yeah, I mean, there were definitely still some people that I interviewed who I've, like, met since and are perfectly nice, but I was, like, terrified to talk to because they were just so, they were just such huge heroes of mine. And I'm like, why am I here? How did this happen?
Yeah. What happened to Ink Heist? Like, I think I remember seeing a tweet saying that you guys weren't gonna be doing any more shows, but I can't remember why that was.
I actually don't know. I left the show maybe in 2021, and I didn't really keep up with what happened after that. So I thought I'd heard something about that they were doing shows again, but yeah, I'm not sure what happened after that.
I used to listen to that show, and it was a lot of fun because I found that show was, it was just very relaxed, and you guys would, like, sometimes you guys would be drinking, and
Yeah.
and so that loosens tongues, and it just becomes, like, more of a fun thing, to listen to, I find sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely more of a relaxed sort of feel to it. And because again, we mostly wanted, we had questions prepared in case people needed that kind of prompt. But we always say it was like a master's class in writing, because we would have these guests on, and I mean, like John Langan um, just gave some incredible advice on short stories that I
Mhm.
still sticks with me. John Taff, same thing, like, and I just talked to so many people with so many interesting pieces of advice and all that kind of thing, that I mean, it definitely had a positive effect on my career, on how I wrote.
Yeah. You mentioned John Langan, in one of the podcasts I listened to in preparation for this. You mentioned in that podcast that he gave advice on writing short stories. Is this
Mhm.
and that propelled you to write a bunch of short stories, which ended up in a collection? Every Woman Knows This.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that the conversation you're talking about?
Um, yeah, and it was actually, so that I sort of feel like John Taff was the one who got me to clear that hurdle, because um and this was before I was even a host on it. I'd been on as a guest, and they'd asked me whether, and at the time I'd only put out one book. I had never written a short story. I had written a novel. That was it. And I didn't feel like it was something I could do. So they'd asked me about that. I was like, no, I don't think it's my wheelhouse. And so when Taff was on a little while later, they were like, so our guest Laurel Hightower said she didn't think it was in her wheelhouse, and Taft just goes, "Do it anyway." And I was like, "Heavens," like, but it really
What?
was like, "Okay, you know what? You're right. Let me just see what I can do here." Um, yeah, so I kind of fiddled with this and that, but it was, Langan said, um, he said something about that, because his short stories are just unbelievable. They're
They're
so
incredible. Yeah.
varied. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like he could write about anything and make it wild, or like poignant. And so he was saying about your ideas. He said, he's like, well, it's like, if if you have a dog that always wants to play fetch, and they keep bringing you a ball and you always turn them down, they're going to stop bringing you the ball. And he was talking about, he feels that way about the ideas he gets. He's like,
Mhm.
if his brain brings him an idea, no matter how, like, weird, he'll grab it like the ball and, like, squeak it, see what it does, see if he can do anything with it. And I think that's great advice, because I suspect most people are like this, and probably writers to a greater degree, but I've always had sort of this, like, internal fantasy life going on, like, not necessarily
Mm.
even me, like, as part of an insert to it, but just, like, thinking of this and sort of creating a story here and doing this. And especially, I feel like when I was younger, I was like, "God, you are such a goof. That is the weirdest idea anyone's ever heard. Like, you should never tell people you thought of that." And then I start reading, like, really crazy horror stories. I'm like, "Just kidding. No," and I love
Yeah.
that, because there is, like, it's that need to remove the judgment aspect of it and just say, "Who cares?" And it is interesting, because the more that I write, I've had several occasions where I developed a story idea out of some really wild, weird, fantasy thing that went through my head years ago, and
Mhm.
I would have always thought was too silly to even say anything to anyone about, and I'm like, "No, I actually made a story out of that." So,
Yeah, that's very important because, when I was a kid, I used to do that. I still do that, but, um, when I was a kid, there was times when I'd spend time in a hospital, not me, but I was, like, visiting someone, and you know how when you're visiting someone in the hospital and you're a kid and you're there for, like, hours,
yes.
it's awful, right? I would pretend that I was, like, a detective, and I was searching for the drug smugglers and and stuff like that, right? But the sadly, well, maybe not sadly, it's not sad. I still do that kind of thing, like it's just inside my head. I'm not like creeping around and looking in places I shouldn't, like when I did when I was a kid. But, but now it's just like, like what if I wasn't here being bored? What if I was on like some sort of, I was hunting for something, or it's just to keep things interesting. But it really works really well for writing as well, right? I mean, I think maybe that's why people write.
I imagine so. Yeah, the way I've always kind of considered it is that I had words in my head, and after a certain amount of time, they needed to make it on the page. It wasn't enough anymore to just have it be sort of this running commentary in my head. I wanted to have the time and the space to develop it more. It's interesting that you say that about being bored as a kid and doing that. I had read something recently which really struck me that talked about how important it is to be bored, because
Mhm.
if we are constantly reaching for something to occupy us, which, hey, guilty, someone needs to take that phone out of my hand and throw it in the river. But you
Yeah.
know, it is, if you allow yourself to be bored, that is where these things start happening. And for a long time, whenever I've been a little bit stymied on where I want a scene to go, or I'm like, this isn't coming together quite right, instead of continuing to work on it, I go for a walk,
Mhm.
because it's the physical activity is great, and then also, like, there's just something about that helps me clear my mind, to the point that usually around the time I'm finishing, and I don't even actively go like, all right, let's go on this walk and figure this scene out. It's more just that I'm in my head, and then things clear, and then my brain kind of works on it, and a lot of times it'll be like, maybe this. So that's what I was telling my son earlier today, because he was talking about like being bored. I was like, that's actually a good thing
Yeah.
you know
Trying to teach my son, he's 10, and he's attached to his tablet. He's gonna be attached to his cell phone when he gets one, because right now his tablet goes everywhere he goes, except for school, and I worry about that, because it's like, I mean, I'm the same way, so maybe it's not so
yeah.
bad, but but yeah, I just worry, about him. But I guess that's important. Important aspect of being a parent, just worrying about every little thing that your kid does. Like, is this a bad habit? Is he gonna get brain damage from this?
And it's so funny because I think most of us, before we became parents or leading up to it, we had all these ideals of what we were and weren't going to do, and
Mm,
screen time limits and all these kinds of things. And sometimes people stick with them, sometimes they don't. There is zero judgment from me on any of those things.
yeah.
Especially, like, parenting during lockdown. I was like,
Mm,
my God, please be occupied by the TV. But he was 2 at the time, so that had a short limit. But and I had heard about, like, TV being so bad and so passive, but I noticed that it is a huge spur for his imagination. A lot of the and he writes, he has me type up his stories and he fully illustrates them, but his imagination has always been huge, and a lot of times it springboards from what he watches, like most of us. We get inspiration from the media we consume, and I think you just pay attention to your kid.
mhm,
My stepson didn't, like, we could tell physically he didn't do well when he was playing video games past a certain amount of time. And
mhm,
so we
yeah,
limited that, but so, like, not out of like some arbitrary, like, X amount of thing. We just were like, okay, you're not doing okay. Like, you're getting way too, and which again, I get, like, I'm not a big gamer, in large part because I feel like I could easily get sucked in and do literally nothing else.
yeah,
Um, and it is very easy to get emotionally, like, you get angry when something happens, or you're frustrated and all this kind of thing. So it's just one of those things, like, when you're a parent, part of it is, like, helping them, like, recognize that and then just be like, "Okay, this is having a negative effect on you. It's observable. It's frustrating to be asked to stop, but this is kind of, this is where we're gonna step in and do this." So,
Yeah,
just every kid is different.
we had that same hurdle where like, it was bedtime, it was time to get off the tablet, or you've been on it too long, you're getting cranky, it's time we do something else, like play a game or even watch TV, and he would get, like, very upset about it, but he's better at it now. If we're like, "It's time to get off the tablet," he'll whine about it, but he won't get mad, you know what I mean? So, that's a
Yeah.
good thing. Now I have a comment here about, Crossroads,
Okay.
or Crossroad. It's kinda sad one, but I wanna I
Yeah.
wanna bring it up. Raphael says, "I read Crossroad a month after the death of my son. Thank you so much for the catharsis and for the chaos. Oddly, it centered me. I can get through this. You are a lifesaver, Miss Hightower. Thank you."
I am so glad, Raphael.
Oh,
I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so
yes, me
sorry for your
too. Very
loss.
sorry. I can't imagine, like, the pain.
Yeah, but if it's and I'm sorry, I'm an easy crier, so but I'm not worried about it. I'm happy to cry.
I'm
But
sorry I didn't mean to make you cry.
no, no, I'm just like I'm so grateful that Raphael shared that with us
Yeah,
and that it was of any help. Like that
touched.
that is the biggest compliment that I can get. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that
Absolutely.
helped you.
Yeah. And I hope you're doing better, Raphael. There's, like, no words, you know? That's they say that's one of the most painful things that a person can go through is losing their son, and my heart goes out to, like, everyone who is willing to talk about that, and it's good that you talk about that because that's how you heal, and, so, yeah, I wish you the best, Raphael. Thank you so much for sharing.
Same here. Same here. It's interesting that's, I've had a few people tell I it came out in August of 2020. So I was like, "I am so sorry for releasing this deeply depressing thing, like, when the world's already on fire and everyone feels like shit." So I actually regularly talk people out of buying it. If they're asking about stuff, I'll be like, "How are we," how and genuinely because I don't want people to suffer.
Mhm.
Like reading is an escape. Reading is to be seen. Reading is, all of these things. And I just don't want people to have to suffer through it. But it is interesting. I've had a few people tell me that it was very helpful in the grief aspect. And that just makes me so happy because um, there's, as much as royalties are awesome and, things like that are great. I write to connect with people. Some a lot of times we say, and I think this is accurate, that we write what we wish someone had written, that we could read. But I write um, to create a way to connect to people because so many like Kevin Smith is one of my favorite directors
Mhm.
and he does some slightly goofy things, but there's also you can really see his heart in absolutely everything he does, including Tusk.
Mhm.
All of these like crazy things. He has this empathy and humanity in it, and he has these like universal like Chasing Amy really spoke to me. Um, Dogma, those kinds of things, and he just has this way of like, hey, this isn't about like this big commercial appeal. It's I see you and you're not the only one that's felt that way. And that is always such an amazing experience for me when I read like that and I have that experience or I watch a movie. So there's really nothing better. There really isn't.
Absolutely. I love it when I come across something where you feel like you've been suffering through something alone, and uh, and then you read a book where there's like a theme that follows along with what is bothering you. It's just such a great feeling to realize you're not alone, and that
Yeah.
somebody else has gone through almost exactly what you've gone through because you can identify with this thing so closely.
Yeah.
It's there's nothing else like it. That's why one reason why I read, uh, because of that. It's like you're always kind of chasing that dragon.
Yeah. That's
Either
a good way to put
yeah,
it. Yes.
either you, either you just wanna be entertained. I mean, all reading is I always say that reading's like a drug to me because it takes me out of this world completely and it puts me somewhere else. And either it's for entertainment or it's to connect, and I really love connecting.
Me too. Me too. And it's great when you have like both of those aspects. I have to shout out one that I recently read for a blurb by Carson Winter. It's called "A Spectre is Haunting Green Tree," And like the premise is about this like kind of weird, almost Stepford town where essentially like the scarecrows come to life, like which is not a spoiler. It's like what you can tell from the cover. And the premise, it's set like kind of in like I don't know, it's got this very fall like feel, like it's and I think it's coming out in August, so it's going to be great for that like aesthetic. But
Hmm.
I hadn't read anything by Carson before, and when I did, I was like, why is this hitting me so hard? It's like, but his way of writing his main character and these connections and this way that she feels and this sense of worthlessness and this sense of trying to find herself, he just hits that in just the right spot that I was like, why am it's a book about scarecrows. Why am I crying? But I mean, it's such a gift, you know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So pre-order that from Tenebris. It's such a good book, and
What's the
I'm
name of
gonna.
it again?
It's called A Spectre is Haunting Green Tree.
Is Haunting Green Tree. All right, I'm gonna check that out because that sounds incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good.
The title has to be long too, right? It's like, all right,
All right, Lorica,
I'm
this is your
almost there.
fault.
I'm almost there.
Yeah.
Oh man. So one more thing, or a couple more things here I wanted to cover. I did not know that your mother, she writes as well.
Mhm.
Is this where you got the bug from? Do you think? I know that at first you were like, no, because you've seen her struggle, and you've
Yeah.
seen her struggle financially and even like artistically, but still, do you think that there's a connection?
Oh, I mean, there'd about have to be. I think where it comes in is there's probably some genetics there, as there would be like in other art if you have a singer who you know procreates and has other children who have that sort of innate ability. That's probably part of it. Another part of it is just the availability of reading material, the encouragement,
Hmm.
because it never occurred to me that you couldn't do that as a living. It did regularly occur to me that you shouldn't do it as a living, because I was like, "God, that looks hard."
Yeah.
And I'm very like I'm a planner. I like to know what's happening like multiple years out. Like my budget sheets are outrageous. How far out I plan and all the variables. But yeah, there's that. And then there was like we were kind of held to a high standard. Like people think that it's hyperbole when I say that she would red pen my kindergarten papers, but she did, because she wanted us to be the best that we could. And it, regularly, as much as I really struggled with math and things like that, I would commonly get really, really high marks in writing.
Hmm.
Um, because I'd been sort of boot camp whipped into shape on it. So yeah, I think I'm certain that had an effect. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, I would like to switch the conversation to, I think, a topic that most of us are really intrigued by, and that's, of course, ghosts and
Yes.
hauntings. Now, I've listened, as I keep mentioning, I listened to you extensively, especially in the past week on podcasts and whatnot. And I know you do believe in at least there's something to ghosts, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you've had experiences,
Mhm.
but I think you mentioned that in more than one podcast, but nobody ever asked you, like, what is, and this was like, question came to me from hearing you guys talk about this, but nobody asked, what is the scariest ghostly experience you've ever had?
Hmm. Scariest is that is interesting because I'm trying to think how I felt in the moment of things. And one of the occurrences that happened was mostly the most terrifying aspect of it, although it was scary in the moment. I think we're very good as humans about talking ourselves out of something like that. As soon as we
Hmm.
got the lights on and
Yeah.
we know we're alone, it's very easy to just say like, okay, and I never really much got to the point of saying like it didn't happen, but I would just sort of like, okay, there's no point in telling anyone about this. It just is what it is. Ghosts are
Yeah.
freaky. At least sleep with the light on. But then after the fact, talking to my sister a few years later, and she out of nowhere is like, okay, so this thing kept happening at that house and just like exact same description as me, and we had never talked about it. Um, like, there's always this part of you that feels a little bit self-conscious about, whatever, but I'm like, that's cool. Everyone can judge me. I'm a horror writer. What do you expect from me? Um, but I think that there's definitely something to the idea that ghosts and spirits are drawn to or connected to running water. Um, and so my house that I live in now, I've been here 17, 18 years, long time. And the house itself is not haunted, in my opinion, but there is water that runs under the property. And for a period of like 6 months or so, there was something that was making connection. And so like in the moment, the scary thing that made me like literally throw my hair dryer and run off, like actually screaming. I was in my bathroom drying my hair, and you're a little bit sensory deprived anyway. It's like my hair in my face, and a pair of rotted feet, just the feet, jumped into the bathroom on the floor, like next to mine.
Oh my God.
And I mean, and again, it's like I can at this distance be like, probably. And then I'm like, no, no, because it was scary enough in the moment that I threw my hair dryer, left it
Yeah.
running, and went screaming out of my room. And I still don't know what the hell that was. I don't, I feel like whatever was hanging around at that time was not malevolent, uh, but it was taking too much interest,
Yeah.
and probably because I was taking too much interest in it, which how are you going to not like, oh, there's some feet, whatever, that's fine. But I kind of ended up getting past that by just sort of like communicating in a way and I'm Southern, enlisting the help of some deceased relatives and be like, could you maybe, if you guys got to stay, if you're gonna talk to this feet guy, could you just ask him to just leave, or just hang out in the
Yeah.
backyard, just whatever you can do, kind of thing. So yeah, it was a short period, especially for the length that I've lived in the house. But yeah, that was the scariest moment. Right? It's feet. Why
Yeah.
feet?
Why feet? I have a really scary story. Do you mind if I share?
Oh, I would love to hear it.
Okay. Well, I was dating this woman who had a couple of kids, and one of them was like 3 years old. She was really young, but she lived in this place where, like, you would have like typical haunting type situations where sometimes things would go flying off the shelf, and the temperature would go down, and it'd get really cold in one room only.
Oh, wow.
And one night, the power started flickering, and the lights dimmed and then came back on, and then it got really cold, and her one daughter started crying, the 3-year-old daughter, and so we ran up to her, and she was awake and sitting up in her bed, and her eyes were just full of tears, and we were trying to
Oh,
console her, right? And she just looked at us and she said, "You can't see them, can you?"
damn.
And right after that, everything went back to normal. And it didn't stay that we would have episodes, but that spooked the living hell out of me.
No kidding.
And
No kidding.
we were like we were like asking her, "Who are you talking about? Who can you see that we can't see?" And she wouldn't answer any of the questions after that. So
Yeah.
it was just it was very spooky. I don't know what was going on there, but every time I pass that house now, because it's in the same town that I live in, I'm just like, yeah, that place that's haunted.
That's so, it's so funny because I think around that age, like the 2 to 4 mark, maybe. My theory on that is just that they're much closer to the veil because they've more recently passed into the living world. Because my son would do that sometimes, not quite to that, extent, but I was giving him a bath one day. I'm just like sitting there and he's playing in the tub, and he looks up and he waves, and I'm like, "Who are you waving to?" He's like, "Oh, that lady in the blue dress." And I'm just like, "Okay, well, I hope she's benevolent, And a couple
Hope
times
she's
he's,
friendly.
yeah, didn't know about the lady in the blue dress. Look at her feet. Are they okay? Yeah, okay.
They rotted and
Not her,
angry
not
looking.
her. Yeah, she's, that guy's gone. But he has a couple of times picked up on something, and I feel like, and this is a very normal thing for parents to do, especially back when I was a kid. But like, if I was like, "Oh my god, I saw this thing," my parents would be like, "Will you stop trying to scare your sister?" And I'm like, "I'm 5. That's not my responsibility." I didn't think that at 5, but as an adult, I'm like, "Are you serious?" But when he says something, I'm just like, "Let's go." Like, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna be that parent that's like, "There's no monster under your bed." No, I'm just like, "Okay, I don't know if there is something there, but you see it, so let's just fucking leave." Like, there's no point in, like,
Or getting
sitting
the
here and me being that parent, you know? It's like, "Okay,
yeah.
I'm gonna close the door."
Yeah. Oh man, kids, Katrina, she left a comment saying that kids can be so creepy and she's right because just from what you were talking about in my experience there, it's like some kids just have this connection to that world that we can't see. And then you just lose most kids, I would say, lose it at a certain point. And so you got to wonder, like, what is it? Like, are they just because they're so close to being born that they're just still connected in some way? Or,
That is my theory, and I have seen it work on the other end of things. I volunteered at a nursing home for 3 years, and I
mm,
had several, like, special friends that I would visit. But the one that I was most connected to and saw most often, she had family, but she didn't she was 100 years old, and, her sister was in a nursing home in, like, Bowling Green, so several hours away, and so her niece and nephew were there. They would come visit, but they couldn't as often because they were taking care of their mom. So I was there with her every week and would spend holidays with her and stuff. So we got really close. And she was so funny. She was so, like, irascible, and she could be so ornery. I loved her. Her name was Helen. And she, commonly would be like, "I'm dying. Didn't you hear me say I'm dying?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." So she would say that for a while, but it got to the point close to the time that she did pass away where I would be visiting with her and would talk about the next time I was coming, and she would say, "Okay, well, I may not be here when you get here." I'm like, "Oh, this is getting dark." And she said, "Well, I might be going to the farm to visit mama and daddy."
mm,
She's like, "I was there earlier. Mama made biscuits in the iron cast iron skillet." Like, to me, it's like she was having those experiences. She was connecting through that because she was close to the time when she was going to pass through it.
mm-hmm.
So I thought that was really interesting, and and that was before I had my son, and then when I did, I was like, yeah, I feel like there's just this, like, bookend possibility, and it probably doesn't happen with everybody. It might depend,
Yeah.
on experience and suddenness and all this kind of thing. But she was close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she died of irritation. I think
She was so irritated.
she was so pissed off. She put up with a lot of stuff, but she had diabetes, and um past a certain point she started having problems swallowing. And so
Okay.
they put thickener in all
Mm.
her, and that was the last straw for her. Like, I can't, like, I came one Sunday and they were like, "Just to be careful, she's trashed the place." I was like, "She's in a wheelchair. Like, what are you talking about?" No, walked in, she had destroyed her room. And it's because she was pissed off about, she loved to drink water. She drank water all day. And she was pissed off about that. And I was like, I visited with her, tried to make her feel better. She was gone by Wednesday. She got pneumonia and died like 3 days later. And you cannot convince me that she did not just decide, "That's it, I'm out. Like, I've been hanging out by the veil for a while, and I'm just middle fingers up, I'm gone. This is
Yeah.
too much for me to deal with."
I can't
And
do
I mean,
this.
no, I was sad, but I was just like, "Get it, Helen, get it."
Yeah,
You
yeah.
make your choice when you're done.
Yeah, actually, there's a couple of TikToks, channels. I don't know if you do TikTok much, but there's a couple of, what's it? They're nurses, but they're in, what's that? I can't, for some reason, the name's escaping me, but if you're
Like
dying,
ICU,
no, not the
ICU,
ICU,
or
when you're
hospice.
dying, yeah, hospice,
Yeah,
hospice nurses. And there's 2 of these people I follow on TikTok, and they both report the same things that, a lot not everyone, but a lot of people who are dying experience, like, seeing family members and old pets, and you often see them, like, reaching at the ceiling before, like, hours before they die and stuff like that. It's just, they're like, "We don't know exactly what this is, but, it's interesting." It seems like they're, you know, talking with old loved ones, and so maybe there is something to, the light and having family members in there, but I guess we won't find out until it's time.
which is probably for the best.
Yeah, probably for the best. But speaking of hauntings, you released a novella recently called Day of the Door.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we've been talking a lot about ghosts, so I was wondering, what's the genesis behind writing this story?
Yeah. So a lot of it really just, this is that seemed like inspiration through media kind of thing. I'd been playing around with an idea of, like, addressing, adult children of narcissists and that sort of thing, because I feel like there's a lot there's a lot to be said about that. It's an unfortunately common experience. And I was kind of just like playing around with that idea, and then I was watching. I love ghost hunting shows, and I love any sort of like ghost show. So I was watching one of those like recreation shows, where the families come together and
Mhm.
talk about something that had happened, or roommates or whoever. And it's usually a very positive experience, but a couple times I kind of sat up and took notice because and it was the times that I saw it, it was referencing mothers. I'm not saying that it couldn't be a father, it just happened to be what I saw.
Mhm.
But you would have this mother who was talking about all these experiences and very centering it on herself, and like, well, this is what happened to me. I was the victim. And she sort of nonchalantly is saying like, well, yes, and that's why I treated my children so horribly during that time, but not with any empathy towards them. She's saying like, isn't it awful, that I was so haunted that I did these things. And I was like, okay, what do her kids think about this? And I'm looking at their faces, and the one that I remember the most, she had two daughters, two grown daughters, and the youngest was just eating up every word. She's just like, hey, she's nodding, and it was like, of course, that has to be the explanation. And the oldest daughter, you could tell, like, as soon as the cameras were off, she was just like, she's like, "I brought this razor blade, and I'm gonna fucking cut you." And I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
"Yeah," she was, like, just looking at her eyes, I was like, "Yeah," because, and it got me thinking on levels of responsibility for that. And it's a touchy subject because I know, and I tried very hard to not make direct connections on like the is it mental illness versus this, because I know some about it, but I do not I don't really care for anything that's like, I don't know. I want to be careful how I address things like mental illness because,
Mhm.
it's not for me to say certain things, and I don't want to make certain comparisons that can be harmful. So I was trying
Mhm.
to be very careful on that. But in looking at it, I was also kind of like, okay, let's say, regardless of what you want to say caused this, because some people will watch that and say she clearly, had an illness. She was not doing well. That's why this is going on. But in looking at it, I'm like, okay, so regardless, what's your responsibility as a parent? Because I don't think it's enough, in my opinion, it's not enough to just say, well, the ghost is making me do it, so I'm just not responsible. If you're I'm going to sound judgy when I say this, but if you're a parent and you are somebody who cares about your children, your goal is not about what you're suffering. Your focus is on how do I keep them safe.
Mhm.
And especially since I have a son now, like, I mean, I considered it. I was like, okay, I believe in ghosts. Let's say, that I don't happen to believe in possession, but if I started acting weird, whatever the reason would be, if it was because was suffering something, or because there really was an entity, like, my job is to get my kid to safety
Mhm.
at even and especially if it comes at my expense, because it's my responsibility to keep him safe from everything, including myself, if necessary. So just kind
Yes.
of an interesting thing I wanted to ponder. And I sort of started kind of like working from there and making some connections, and then I really liked what I had put together. Then I let it simmer for a while because I wanted to, I wanted to hit it when I had developed it enough in my head, and then it was just a really fun write after that.
Yeah. I like what you said there about that family you were watching, because there's some parallels there. It's like you were taking that situation and kind of making it your own. Um, and in the story, you never. I wrote down here in my notes that you never necessarily trust the sisters, especially Kate, in being on Nate's side and getting the truth out of their mother. And Kate appears to be, she's not necessarily, but she appears to be quite loyal,
Mhm.
and torn, uh,
Yeah.
about her mother, Stella. I was wondering, like, what is it? Like, of course, we're not psychologists here, we're not professionals, but I just wondering what your thought of is why are, like, we've all had somebody, probably most people anyway, have had suffered through somebody who's a narcissist,
Mhm.
and you know what that can be like. What would make somebody loyal to that?
So, and it's interesting because I actually didn't do this reading until after the book was already out, but I started recently reading about complex PTSD, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I've heard of
um,
it, yes.
yeah. So essentially, for anyone listening who's not, it has to deal with you know, we know what PTSD is, and we have associations with like a traumatic event, essentially. Complex PTSD is complex because it is caused by continued exposure to something. So generally we're talking about childhood. We're talking about somebody who is in a not safe or a somewhat neglectful position, and it's so interesting to me to read about how that affects people as adults and how, I'm reading some other books on the subject now, and how the neglect aspect of things actually has I'm reading that it has a more negative effect than sometimes physical abuse.
Hmm.
Um, and we're all familiar with fight and flight, as the responses, to adrenaline, but there's also freeze and fawn. And I hadn't heard of fawn until I was reading this book on complex PTSD, and I was like, oh my god, yes, like, because children are geared towards, if you've got caretakers, you've got caregivers, your survival depends on your connection to them. And if you have one who is lacking, because of their own issues, because of narcissism or whatever, a child learns to solely look at what the parent is doing and give them what they need as a method of survival. So, and I didn't even think about it until I was on Staring into the Abyss and was talking to them about, this thing. And Villame said, oh, well, each of the four characters is one of those. And I didn't mean to do that, but it's like it
Hmm.
was fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So it was Sean, Nate, Ori, and Kate,
Hmm.
that hit that. But yeah, the fawning aspect, I think, is something that I wish more people understood, because I think that people who deal with that, and it definitely translates to adulthood, and ways of doing certain relationships. Like, I think people who develop that coping mechanism feel bad about themselves. They feel like, why am I this spineless loser? Why am I this person who continues to suck up to the people who cause me pain? Why am I still being influenced by this? And it's because your neural pathways literally were carved that way. They were developed in a method of survival, because at that moment, and during your childhood, nothing mattered more to your continued survival and well-being than anticipating the needs of this very erratic narcissistic parent.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting to read about, and again, something that I wish more people knew, because I've heard other people say, like, I have no backbone, I this and whatever. And it's like, let's release the self-blame on that. I mean,
Yeah.
we're, as children, we don't have any control over these things, and we do the best we can.
That's an excellent explanation. Thank you for sharing. Because I was kind of at a loss. Like she's not completely on Stella's side, but there is that fawn that
Mhm.
that where she's sort of torn about it, but it just had me curious, like why? Because anytime, like I've known a couple of narcissists, and I don't gel with them, right?
Yeah.
And one of them was a boss, and that was an exceptionally awful
Oh, yeah.
situation.
That's rough.
I ended up well, I left that job anyway for various reasons, but that was one of them. Katrina comments, and she says Stella was the worst. You nailed the narcissistic character so well.
Yay! I love to hate her.
Yeah, it's so easy, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with Katrina. You really nailed that character. Like, it's very well done,
Thank you.
I've never written a narcissistic character myself. Despite having known some of them. How did you approach writing a character that has this sort of complexity?
I think complexity is a good word for it. Because as awful as Stella is, and maybe readers won't necessarily feel this way about her, but I have a certain amount of empathy, because for someone to be that messed up, they're dealing with their own trauma, a
They're
lot of it.
hurting really bad.
Yes, yeah, they are. And so it's very sad, to know people who are in that position. And I think the saddest part for me is this: I don't want to believe that anyone is irredeemable, and this isn't about blame. But there are certain people, and probably your boss fit into this category of, like, they are never going to develop the ability to move beyond this.
Mhm.
They are not going to ever develop the self-reflection that's needed, because I feel like most of us have had at least one or two instances in our life, not necessarily being narcissists, but like sitting back and like, whoa, my behavior,
Yeah. Yeah.
in this was really inappropriate and I didn't realize that I was causing harm, but now I do. It's a
Yeah.
painful, painful thing to think. And a lot of us, our first reaction, especially when we were younger, is just hit back, like, oh, well, I only did it because of this, whatever, which is not conducive to relationships with anybody for any reason.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's deeply sad, and just with Stella, like, with most of my characters, I just wanted to get in her head. I kind of have reason to know something about some narcissists, and observe their behavior, and again, what is so frustrating and upsetting, uh to people who have suffered under narcissists, is how charming they can
Oh,
be
yeah,
in short
especially at the
doses.
beginning. In the
Yeah,
beginning, they're like the greatest like
yeah,
my boss situation when he first came, he was that charming Mr. Charming. He's like the new boss and everyone was like, "This guy's great." But
yeah,
then certain things started slipping through and then next thing you know, he's never wrong. His idea's always
yeah.
right. We suck. We're the laughing stock of the factory. and we got to improve and of course none of it's his fault even if his ideas crash it was somebody else's faults and yeah it was a mess.
Yeah. And it's got to be a very painful existence. Because as painful as it is to come to a realization that maybe your behavior is, not been right, or you really hurt someone, it's more painful to never learn how to make that right.
Hmm.
It's more painful to never learn how to apologize appropriately without expecting, any sort of like reconciliation. It's and this is something we teach our children. It's like, hey, you need to apologize, not so that you're forgiven, but so that this other person who maybe you hurt recognizes that you feel remorse and understand what you've done, and so that it's for your well-being.
Hmm.
When I was much younger, I didn't have the bravery to apologize.
Hmm.
I would just sort of like, if you know, if I it's their upset is based on motion. If I don't make any sudden moves, they won't notice that I'm here and
Yeah.
I've done this crappy thing. Um, and I would excuse it to myself by saying like, well, if they were really upset, they would say something. While on the flip side of it, I never told anyone I was upset about anything. And
Hmm.
I finally was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I need to be proactive on this.
Yeah.
Um, but for somebody to, instead of having those coping mechanisms, to just have to curl into a tighter ball, or find a new job, or ditch their relationships and start over because they're just not capable of getting out of these patterns, is deeply sad. But it is another one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, you are hurting. My empathy for you dips quite a bit when you start doling that out to other people.
Hmm. Absolutely. And it's always amazed me those people who are incapable of self-reflection.
Mhm.
It's it I've often wondered if they don't self-reflect but they axe that thought immediately and say, "No, that's wrong," because it hurts too much to think that I can be a bad person.
I'm sure. I mean, I guess I shouldn't, I think I spend more time than I need to trying to get in the heads of certain people, because, like,
Yeah.
sometimes for my own good, it's enough to just say, this behavior is not good for me. So I'm going to step away, and it doesn't really matter why you're doing it. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a tightrope, right? You don't want to, because that's where you start coming up with assumptions, and assumptions are the mother of all fuck ups, right? So
yeah, they
so,
really are.
yeah, so I fall into that trap all the time where I'm trying to figure out where someone's coming from, and I like I did just now, you gotta say back it up and say, "Oh, I have no idea what's going on in their head." We
It's, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was, it is, like you said, it's a tightrope walk, because one of the things, so I do a lot of reading on things like, the complex PTSD, and I do some reading, some Buddhist type reading for spiritual studies, but mostly
Mm,
for,
that's interesting.
well, it's been really, really helpful.
It is,
I read
absolutely.
Pima Chodron. She's a
Oh, I love her.
Buddhist. Oh, right. Okay, so
Yeah,
you know who I'm talking about.
I know,
And
yeah.
um, my lovely therapist, who I just, she's amazing. She recommended. Pima's probably most famous book, the When Things Fall Apart,
Mhm.
the hard advice for difficult times for me. And it was really immensely helpful because it's so much of this taking a step back and being like, okay, let's recognize our connection to other humans. We are all the same.
Mhm.
And people, that you don't feel the slightest connection to have suffered from the same things that you have. And if you genuinely want to walk this path and you genuinely want to make things better, then you have to learn how to take a step back and figure out how to relate to people. And that doesn't mean that you let them beat up on you, doesn't mean that you continue to interact with people who hurt you, but it's true. And I mean, I have definitely, like, there are a lot of reasons to be genuinely angry.
Mhm.
There really are, especially right now, the state of the world. Like, I feel like I'm incandescent, like, a huge percent of the time, and it's valid. However,
Yes.
she really arrested me with it when she was talking about, but what has it ever accomplished? Like, if you get in a yelling match with somebody, no matter how right you are, what have you accomplished, and do you feel any better? Like, how can we possibly reduce the amount of hate in the world if we're spewing it out?
Mhm.
And this, I always worry about talking about this because sometimes I feel like when people, if you do things different than someone, they might take it as a judgment on their methods. So, like, there's no part of me that's like, let's just all hold hands and no one should argue on the internet ever again. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
people, and particularly people who are, like, for example, if you're part of a marginalized community and you're dealing with a bigot, the people part of that community should not be the ones who have to stand up and fight, you know. And I'm not going to tell anyone not to get mad about stuff like that. But I do find that it's much more conducive to my peace of mind and to actually getting things done to try to take a step back, no matter how pissed off I am about somebody, no matter
Mhm.
how hard it is for me to understand what they're doing, and say, like, okay, but they have a reason. I don't know it, and maybe I wouldn't care about it if I did, but to them it makes sense. So I have to find a way to connect without screaming, to connect and see. And I mean, it's hard sometimes. It's really
Mhm.
hard. But it's been really helpful for me. And I feel like there have been a number of situations where something good was accomplished, not necessarily by me, but just because I was able to take a step back and
Yeah. Yeah, Pima Chodron, she has these audiobooks out where they're basically just her speaking at,
mm.
like, a conference, and there's one I would highly recommend if you haven't listened to, it's called Don't Bite the Hook.
I
Um,
have that disc actually. Yeah, my
that's
husband got it
so
for me
good.
for Christmas.
It's
Okay.
so good. It saved me. I wouldn't say it saved my life, but it saved my state of mind because a few years ago I went through a situation. I won't get into it too much now. I've talked about it extensively on my channel. That's why I won't go into it now. But it was a bad mental illness period that I went through,
Mm.
and I was listening to Pima Chodron a lot. And what I really love about her lessons is things are going to hurt, things are going to be bad. It When you fight against them, that's what makes it worse, and when you
Yeah.
react to them, that's what makes it worse. And I just absolutely love that about her. But we're getting way off topic here.
I
uh,
tend to do that. So.
oh no, do it. So do I. So do I. But I do have another comment here
Mhm.
from one of my longtime listeners. S. Griffin says, "Hi, Jason. Can only pop in for a minute. I have a family member with complex PTSD. Very interesting discussion. Thank you, S. Griffin."
Yeah, I'm glad that that you're finding it interesting, and I'd like to recommend a book to anybody who is maybe dealing with complex PTSD, but also people who are family members, to kind of help you understand. And that is Pete Walker's book, that's called From Surviving to Thriving, and it is about complex PTSD. And he is just, it's great. It's very accessible, and there's actually like activities, or there's like these toolboxes he's created, and it's very eye-opening. And I do think that it helps, for people who are going through it, and also for people who love someone who is, because if you've lived this really well-adjusted life, you may not understand people with that are running this high all the time.
Hmm.
That it is survival on a daily basis, even though they don't realize it. People are used to feeling that bad. They're used to doing that, and it's very hard to understand, and it can be a hard read at times, because it's like, oh, ouch, but I think it's really, really helpful. I really need to recommend it as a companion piece to The Day of the Door.
that, that works out really well. Um, there's another aspect to the characters in Day of the Door that I really was really impressed by. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Ronald Malfi's Blackmouth, and that's the alcoholism of
Mm,
Nate and how
yeah,
he deals with everything. Because I've read a lot of fiction, I've even enjoyed a lot of fiction of watching, the main character be a destructive drunk, but
yeah,
those stories aren't always necessarily portrayed. The drunk's not portrayed realistically, but I
yeah,
think, Nate, his problems with alcohol is portrayed realistically as it was with, Ronald Malfi's, character in Blackmouth. It shows the ugly side, it shows the desperation and the anger. I don't really have a question here, but I just found it very interesting
thank
to
you.
see it, portrayed in a more, realistic manner than a lot of other, like, I I'll admit I'm guilty for enjoying reading about alcoholics, because oftentimes it's just fun, right? But you don't realize just how wrong it is because they're portraying the illness and the addiction of it wrong, uh, generally. But when you see it portrayed like this, it's just so much more. You can appreciate it more, I think. The
Thank
human
you.
aspect of it.
Yeah, and it is so funny because it is one of the things that, like, I have just tried to coach myself out of thinking in absolutes. Like, if I can't come up with a reason for something, then because we fill in the gaps a lot with people. If we don't see a reason for what they're doing, we might say, like, well, the only reason they could be doing this is to piss me off, or because they're angry at me, or any one of a number of these things. But the more you talk to people, the more you realize that you can't get in everyone's head, and um where there might be situations where we're, judgmental as a society about, somebody who's an alcoholic. And we might say, like, well, we would never do that. I think it's really interesting to observe, like, um, I'm very fortunate to not have, I guess, what you would consider an addictive personality. I've not really had to deal with that, which is great. However, it took me until a few years ago to be like, that's not a virtue. Like, the fact that I don't suffer with that does not make me a better person than someone who has.
Mhm.
Um, and when we look at it, like, well, I would never do that. Well, I kind of noticed I hurt my hip a number of years ago. I tore the hip sartorius muscle. It was excruciating, like,
Mm. That
most of the
sounds
time.
awful.
It sucked.
Yeah.
But I went out with my sister one night, and we got a few drinks, and I realized after I'd had two, I was like, I feel oh God, wait, this is why people do it for pain relief. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, this is a bad realization. But I mean, I get it, because it is not just physical pain that causes people to go down that.
Mhm.
It is a lot of mental, and there's a spectrum of alcoholism.
Mhm.
There's because I think the other thing that's portrayed, and I know that it is true for a lot of alcoholics, is that they can't drink anything. Like,
Mhm.
if you have the one drink, it's going to set you off and you're done. There are a lot of other people who are on different parts of the spectrum where it's like they can let it get out of control, at which point they need to pull back and maybe not drink for a while.
Mhm.
And, or they need to, like, cut back what they drink, or the amount, or who with, and in what situations. And yeah, I mean, being able to, like, look and see, like, nope, I actually really see why somebody went down this road,
Mhm. 'Cause it
be-
alleviates pain
mhm,
briefly, but the
yeah,
pain that comes later is so much more. And
yeah,
but the brain, you talked earlier about rewiring, neuro,
mhm,
plasticity in the
yeah,
brain. Your brain doesn't realize that this is gonna hurt tomorrow. It just
yeah,
thinks this feels good now. And
yeah,
so that's what it becomes programmed to believe, right?
yeah, yeah.
And that's why you keep going back to it. It's like, "This is gonna make me feel great." Yeah, it's gonna make you feel great for a few hours, but
But then there's always tomorrow.
yeah.
Then I'll get home from work and there'll be another bottle of bourbon. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so going back to, uh, Day at the Door, the haunting in it, I really enjoyed that aspect because it this this house didn't fool around.
no.
This this house is out and out haunted, and it's gonna let you know, there's no question. that this house is haunted, and I love that because sometimes you're reading a book and you're like, is this place haunted or is it just in the person's mind? You know, but no, this everyone's experiencing something.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely enjoy some ambiguous horror. I think Paul Tremblay does it
Oh,
amazingly
he's the
well.
master, right?
Oh yeah, he really is. But for my stuff, I enjoy. I want the supernatural aspect of it.
Yeah,
I love the paranormal. I love the ghosts. It's very rare for me to write anything without any sort of paranormal aspect of it. Unless it's like bitchy short stories about, murdering misogynists, etc. You know,
yeah.
then we don't need a ghost, right?
No, you don't need a ghost for that.
No, but but yeah, I really love the ghost aspects of things. I mean, I feel like it's, you add a ghost and it makes everything better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do like the Paul Tremblay approach too. Like that,
Mhm,
I read or House Full of Ghosts, Head Full of Ghosts
mhm.
for the first time recently, and that I don't have you read that? Like
Oh yes,
that
yeah,
ending. That
yeah,
ending had me like staring at the wall for quite some time afterwards. I did not see that coming.
yeah.
Oh my
He
god.
had some great unexpected creepy moments in that, like
Yeah.
what she does to the priest.
Oh yeah.
Like when I realized, I was like, ah, ugh, ah, like that's a horrible,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I would never been like, wow, that's something that grosses me out.
Yeah.
Very inventive. Yeah,
But
I think he's really excellent at that.
oh, he is, but I really enjoy this approach too, where there's like, balls out haunting. It's not even shy about it.
Yeah.
And and I also really enjoyed the camera crew recording the haunting for the show. I thought that was a really cool. I mean, I guess there is a parallel to what we were just talking about, the Paul Tremblay book, but I felt it was a cool approach because it was different. It wasn't like for a big, television it wasn't it for, like, YouTube or something like that? Like,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
popular YouTube channel? Yeah. I was wondering, though, did you ever consider writing this in a media, epistolary sort of style? Or was it always just, like, the straight narrative that we got?
It was the straight narrative. I don't think I've ever written anything in epistolary. I feel like this is gonna be one of those John Taft moments where I'm like, do it anyway.
Do
And
it
I'm like, damn
anyway.
it, now I have to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it hadn't occurred to me, and I love epistolary when it's done well. It's
Oh, yeah, for sure.
just so great, and it's such a fun method of telling something and keeping other things out. But yeah, I really just I wanted to have a lot of dialogue, because to me it was very important to have the communication between like Nate and Carrie and between Nate and his sisters, because a big part of this was just, I don't know, I wanted to be able to convey that these are broken people that are still capable of connections and capable of healing and worthy,
Mhm.
worthy of love, worthy of good relationships. And I felt like, just the way that I write in general, I wanted it to be that sort of storytelling. I wanted to be able to put that through in dialogue and in their interactions with each other.
Yeah, and you also use some really interesting techniques. The camera crew, um, their names are Gunther and Helter.
Yeah.
They use some really interesting techniques to sort of escalate things, so to speak. I was wondering if any of this is actually true. Like air purifiers, are they really used by ghost hunters? That type
They
of
can
thing?
be, well, I think they're more likely to use something that was specifically like an ionizer. And it's interesting because I've read opposing accounts of it. Some people believe that you want the ions and other people believe that you want negative ions, and
Hmm.
but it's still essentially the same explanation that, one way or the other helps the ghost kind of get more of a handle on things, have more power, have more presence. Um, and I liked the idea of using something that was kind of innocuous, that was more of a like DIY, duct tape kind of thing, instead of like these really expensive, and they do have some instruments that they use, but yeah, I mean a lot of this stuff would be a little bit more unobtrusive.
I just found it funny because when I read that part about the air purifiers, there's like 2 air purifiers in my house that I immediately thought of, and I was like, "Oh, no. Should I maybe, get rid of those?"
Maybe they're cleaning the ghosts out of the air. I
Maybe.
don't know.
There's another interesting topic that you played around with, I found, and that's the idea of strong emotions driving hauntings.
Yeah.
I've known a person where haunting-like activity is actually that ex-girlfriend I was talking about. Um, Anytime she'd get really upset, which was, often, that's every time, that's when the hauntings would occur, like the room getting cold or things going
Mhm.
flying off the shelf. Like, I was at my place, which I'm pretty sure is not haunted at all, and stuff went flying off the room, off a shelf when, she was it would always be right after she was really upset, when she was
That's so
calming down.
interesting.
So, I'm wondering is if there's a phenomenon to this that maybe you're aware of?
It's anecdotal, although it's not. That's not a like a unique theory. I have heard people say that before, and particularly when people talk about like revenants. There's this idea that certain hauntings are just where there was a strong emotion when somebody was killed, so it imprinted on the atmosphere, and they're reliving it there just over and over like a recording. Um, but I mean, I think, and I sort of hate the term empath because anymore there's kind of a lot of connotation to that. But I was definitely and remain so, but I was always a kid who picked up very easily on people's feelings and moods.
Mhm.
I like I think we've all had this experience. You walk into a room where two people have been arguing, like the atmosphere feels heavy.
Yeah.
Or if there's like tension or something like that. Like it and I think human emotions absolutely affect the environment. Absolutely do. Um and I had a little bit of a similar situation to yours. I had an ex that, while we lived together, we had lived apart, and then we moved in together when our leases were up. So we'd lived apart, and then when we lived together, and it wasn't until we had been in our apartment for a little while that we started seeing this manifestation. And it would move around, and it was usually outside the apartment. We had a like a fourplex, so it would be in the outside part, like out of our apartment, but in the middle of the building. um, and you'd never see it moving, but you would see it sitting there, and it was always really unnerving to have to like walk by it, like with your groceries,
Yeah.
and you would hear these noises, and there were times that, that there was just a lot going on there, and the more we talked about it, he had a very upsetting childhood. There were a lot of things that happened that should not have to him, and
Mhm.
this is gonna sound like victim blaming. I certainly don't mean it to be, but after the fact, I kind of because we split up, and when he left, it stopped. And I always wondered how much of that was a projection of his inner turmoil. And again, not like, oh, you're doing this, you're causing it, but you think about poltergeists, and I wonder, there's a theory that they're drawn to like adolescence and turmoil. I wonder, and I think I've heard this theory from other folks before too. It's a projection outside of them. It's what they're dealing with, and it makes perfect sense to me,
Mhm.
that it could manifest. The as deep as it gets, and particularly if they get into certain situations, I can really see why that would be.
Do you think that it can propel or make stronger what's already there? Like a haunt
Yes,
in a supernatural situation?
yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, I think you're right. That's, I think that it would. You've just got more material to work with,
Yeah.
and in the same way that I feel like whatever was, chilling in my house a long time ago sort of took notice of me because I took notice of it. If you've got almost dormant uh, remains there,
Ooh.
something, some kind of consciousness.
I have a kitty cat who's attacking my
Oh,
laptop. Where are you? Oh, this is Sunshine.
oh, hi, sunshine. Aren't you
She was a rescue
pretty?
cat, and the people who
Oh,
rescued her named her Sunshine. So she's like almost 20 now. She's so old.
oh,
Here you
a
go.
sweetie.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. She's going after my wire. There we go.
Well, of course, it's right there.
Yeah. Now she's looking around all confused. Like, where am I?
Same cat, same.
Yeah. Yeah. So, last or not the complete last question here, but last question for Day of the Door. I'm wondering, it's not necessarily left wide open or anything like that, but you could definitely go back to that house. Do you have any plans to revisit Day of the Door at all in the future?
Yes, I m- I plan to have Carrie return, and because her uh, profession very much lends itself to continued investigation, continued experiences, and um, considering the way things are left at the house, I can see there possibly being a need to return there. I don't, but given my druthers, I would like to have at least a few more books with Carrie. She just ended up being a really strong character for me. She had been one that I created for another novella that I haven't written yet. Um, but then when I was writing The Day of the Door, like she was just like, "Hello, I actually think
Hmm.
I'm supposed to be in there," and I was like, "Oh, come on in." So yeah, I think she's somebody that I want to return to. Um,
I found her to be a fascinating character too, uh, because she sort of investigates this, but with a scientific mindset, and that's what I really appreciated about that.
Yeah, thank you. I like that she has these methods, but that she's not, some people sort of almost worship at the altar of science where it replaces theology or spirituality or, any of these other things. And I'm not going to criticize however anybody wants to view the world, but it's a really obnoxious trope to me when you're like watching a haunted house or whatever, and you've got that one character who's just like, I don't believe this because the script says I don't, and I'm just going to continue to insist. And I know that a headless corpse just walked up behind me, and
Yeah,
I don't care, and it's just like, oh my God, will you just not like just accept that it's going on.
yeah.
And to me, it made more sense that she would have acknowledged these situations and found an appropriate way to assist.
That's so true though. So there's always that character. You read them in books and it's like, "Did you not see that headless corpse?" And they're like, it was a projection of something."
Swamp gas or
Yeah, swamp
something.
gas. We're all hallucinating. It's like, why you're coming up with things that are so much more impossible than us seeing a headless corpse.
I know. I feel like if I'm on that team, I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to put you in the corner with your microscope set, and you look at things and you
Yeah,
find an explanation. The rest of us are going to get out of here.
yeah. I love that. All right. So, before we go, I just wanted to brush up a little bit about a couple of things that you've worked on before. Like you've been involved with editing anthologies like We Are
Mhm.
Wolves. And
Yeah.
I was just wondering what kind of work goes into creating an anthology like that. I
Oh
can
God,
only
so
imagine
much,
that it's a
so much.
lot,
It
especially
really
when you have
is.
a young kid, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's every time I see someone like put it out and be like, I want to edit this kind of anthology. I'm like, I'm just like, I
You
don't want to.
don't.
And I don't want to discourage people from doing it because actually it is a really good experience. I feel like,
Hmm.
particularly for someone who's submitting. It really is eye-opening to be like, "Oh, it literally has nothing to do with my work. You got 8 billion submissions, and there's all these things to consider on it." Because I've edited 3 anthologies, 2 were charities, so we solicited, contributions, and 1 was a, slush pile open call, and we got over 600 submissions for that
Oh,
one.
wow. Gosh.
Yeah, and it was, we split up the work, and Sandra Rutan was my co-editor on that. If she'd not been involved, I would have given up immediately because she really knew what she was doing. She's done it before. She's very knowledgeable. Um, but yeah, it's a lot of work because it's managing the guidelines, it's managing the submissions as they come in. Unfortunately, you deal with a lot of people who get weird about it.
Hmm.
They sub outside of the timelines. They sub something that's totally inappropriate. They make weird requests in their emails, or like, you're like, this, I don't think I want to have a professional relationship with this person, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, for the majority of it, it's just writers, doing their thing. And it's a privilege. It really is. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it is a privilege to read someone's story.
Hmm.
They are giving you a chance to review their intellectual property, something that they put a lot of work into, and they're offering it to you for publication. And whether you select their story or not, there's a responsibility to take it seriously, to read it fully, and to, make determinations about what's really going to fit and what's going to be the right thing. So yeah, it's very, very work intensive because aside from the initial, like, reading through and like the multi-step selection process, there's putting everything in order, there's the line editing, there's, all of the stuff like formatting and art and everything like that, and the marketing and all
Mhm.
that kind of thing. There is a lot that goes into it, and I see these occasional back and forths that happen where people are arguing that there's too many anthologies, that nobody could read all of them, and I don't disagree. I don't
Mhm.
disagree, but I also would be sad to see that reduced or dropped off because, gosh, it's hard to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, for sure, right?
A lot of people spend a lot of time unpublished, and it can just eat away at you. It's very uh, it can just be so dejecting, and it can be very easy because this is not a job that's easy on your ego at all.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I kind of didn't think about it at the time, but in doing some of the marketing for it afterward, I realized we had been the first publication for some folks, and they were just so that in itself also feels like a huge responsibility because lots of people have had bad experiences, and I just want everybody to get their chance, and I want them to have a good experience and feel like, yeah, okay, this felt good from beginning to end, and I'm happy that I was part of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. One reason why I ask that is because I have like this project-oriented brain where
Mhm.
I keep going into like I've always backed out and said, no, I'm not going to do this because I know I don't have the time. But I have had ideas where like I could do an anthology. And then I get obsessed about it for a little while. And then I'm like, you know what? No, it's going to take a long time. I already got all these other projects I'm working on. Let's not ruin those projects by bringing this into it.
It does eat up your free time in
Yeah.
ways that I think people aren't, even having done it before, I wasn't super cognizant of. Otherwise, I would never have done it again. You know, but
Yeah.
but at the end, I mean, it really is. The last one I edited was Shattered and Splintered, which was to benefit. It was part of my good friend St. James Sabata does these spirited giving charity events right before StokerCon, and we do these anthologies that are part of it to help raise money. So this one helped raise money for the Glen Haven Volunteer Fire Department.
Hmm.
Because they saved the Stanley during the California wildfires. And man, like when you get this finished product in your hands and you put all this effort into it, and not only have you collected these wonderful voices by people who so generously donated their stories, but you've done something that can, that we managed to raise a significant portion of money. I think over $1,000 on that for just from the anthology. And when you get to write that check, and we had someone from the fire department come and speak, and she was talking about how many sets of turnout gear they would be able to purchase with what we raised. And then one of our friends who was involved with it, Scott Bradley, he's a former firefighter. And he was just like, he came to us and he was like, they're talking about their turnout gear being 5 to 7 years old. He's like, at that point, you might as well be going in several hoodies.
Yeah.
And it's just, man, like sometimes I think when we use our capabilities within what's reasonable for everyone to contribute for themselves, we don't need to be running ourselves ragged on this, but when we're able to put our words to that kind of use and our time to that kind of use, it's a really good feeling. It's a very positive feeling.
That would be. I could see how that would definitely benefit like not only the situation itself, but it just feeling good about you helped make a change that was worthwhile.
Yeah.
This weekend, I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that you had a busy weekend, and it
Yeah.
wasn't just getting a tattoo, but I believe you were judging uh, a horror writing contest, the aquatic
Yeah.
horror writing contest. What was that all about?
It's so that is put on through Death Knell Press, Red Lego. Death Knell put out my collection, which was just a great experience from beginning to end. And Red is a good friend of mine. I like her very much. So she does these flash on the fly competitions, and the point of it is to be able to write flash fiction in a fairly short amount of time. So that's
Hmm.
why you don't get the theme until the window opens, and so you've got 48 hours to write something and submit it, and it's flash fiction, so it's maximum 1,000 words. Um, but it's, yeah, she asked me if I wanted to be a guest judge on it, and I was like, yeah, especially because you get to choose the prompt, and I'm like, dude, everything about water horrifies me. I want to read some more about it. So yeah, I'm really happy that I got asked to do that, and I can't wait to delve into the submissions that people have sent. And also, I'm really impressed at the number of people who were able to turn stuff around like super quick. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I wish I could do that.
'Cause that was part of the point, right? To come up with
Mhm.
something real quick and something less than 1,000 words and just submit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, which
interesting.
the window's still open, folks. I think until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
And the theme is aquatics, right? So anything in the water or
Mhm.
like a big body of water, or does rivers count?
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
however anyone wants to interpret it, because I feel like there's some ways that water can be addressed that don't have to do with bodies of water at all.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awesome.
I mostly just wanted people to submit what scared them, because not everyone's as terrified of water as I am. So
I'm only afraid of water if that's all I can see all around me.
oh God. Oh,
That's a
yes.
terrifying idea. It's
It
like
really
where the sky and the water become one, and you're just like, "No, this
there's
is
no
like some
escape from
crazy
this.
abyss." Yeah. All right, last question before we get into anything promotional. And I ask this question of all my guests, and that is, what author do you think is underrated and more people need to be talking about?
And that is so hard because I feel like there's so many
Oh,
that
there
you
is,
can
right?
name
That's
for a
why I
number of
asked this,
reasons.
because I want to give, there's always like this buzz about certain books and certain authors on BookTube and on Book Talk, but there's always the people who aren't being having a light shined on them, and I want to try to get a light on those authors as well.
That's great. That's a really good use of the platform. Yeah, I thought about this quite a bit, and I think I would recommend S.H. Cooper.
Hmm. You're not the
She
first to recommend her, actually.
Oh, well, that's good because yeah, she just I'm just gonna go ahead and say she's a significantly better writer than I am. And so I always find it like really unfair that her work doesn't get the attention that I feel like it should, because she is just this really concise and like empathetic and warm writer, like there's just and she writes such a range. She's got fantasy, she's got cosmic, she's got, horror and all kinds of things, and her it's just everything I read of hers I is just eminently enjoyable. And I don't know what more you could want from a writer.
Hmm.
But Inheriting Her Ghosts, I think anybody who is looking for a first read of hers, Inheriting Her Ghosts is Victorian Gothic.
Yeah,
And it's so good. There's
I've read that one.
terrifying. Oh yeah, okay. So you know what I'm
That book
talking
is
about then.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it really is.
absolutely
I
love it.
I threw my
Uh,
Kindle at least twice.
About a year ago, I talked about that book a lot about a year ago. And it's incredible. I really enjoyed it. I love those 2 giant dogs that are in
Yes.
it.
Yes.
But that was another house where this or another sort of haunting where it just wasn't fooling around. This was like balls out haunting, and it wasn't shy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so awesome, awesome. So, before we go, do you have anything coming out soon that you can talk about that you would like readers to know?
I don't have any standalone stuff that's scheduled yet, but a an anthology that I'm in just got released Monday. And it's I don't know if you're familiar with Bo Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his Bishop Rider series, he actually opened up and did an anthology of stories written in that universe. So I was lucky enough to be able to write one for that. And so I feel like I've just like crept into the crime writers realm for a minute and been like, "Oh, hey," and
Yeah.
which is they've always been very welcoming to me. They're very kind. But that's really fun. There's a lot of really amazing writers in there. I don't think there's a bad story in the bunch because people just really. It was a great prompt, I think. So yeah, the anthology is Bishop Rider Lives, an anthology of retribution, I believe.
Hmm.
And Bo Johnson edited it along with Hector Acosta. So yeah, it's got S.A. Cosby in it and Megan
Oh, very
Lucas,
cool.
and yeah, there's just a ton of them. It's amazing.
Excellent. And where can readers find you online should they want to follow what you're doing?
Most of the time, I'm most active on Twitter and then on Instagram. I do have a really poorly updated website that says Crossroads coming soon. But the
I
the
looked at that
context
website.
button does work. So
Yeah. I'm also glad that you call it Twitter because I can't
it's
call it
just
it. I'm never gonna call it what's his face there decided to name it because it's just
no,
ridiculous.
I have like a couple times and it's felt really disingenuous on my end.
Yeah,
Like, don't
it's Twitter.
yeah, it's Twitter. Always will be.
Final comment here from Katrina. This was awesome. Loved The Day of the Door. I loved it
Thank
too,
you.
Katrina.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Katrina. Thank you
much.
so much.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina, for coming along and commenting throughout the whole thing. And I want to thank everyone else who came and shared their experiences. I think this conversation got very real, and I think it's one of the most real conversations I've had. And I think it was just before I hit the play or the live button. I told you I've been doing this for about 10 years, so that's saying something. All right, so thanks everyone for coming out, and thank you, Laurel, for coming on my show and talking with me.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, just hitting